So we all think we know how World War I started, right? One assassination and then boom, the world goes to war. But what if that was just the match? What if the real story was about a 100-year-long fuse that had just happened to light? Well, today, we're going to trace that fuse, all the way from the end of Napoleon's reign right up to the trenches of 1914. Let's get into it.
It's the question we all learn in history class, isn't it? How on earth could the murder of one guy, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, by one assassin in Sarajevo, drag the entire planet into the most horrifying war humanity had ever seen? It doesn't seem to add up.
And here's the thing, it didn't. The simple, shocking answer is that the assassination wasn't the cause, it was the trigger. The real cause was a century of massive, unstoppable forces building up pressure across Europe, creating this giant continent-wide powder keg just sitting there, waiting for a spark. And that is the story we're unpacking.
To really understand that explosion, you have to go all the way back to the beginning of the fuse. We're starting in 1815. Napoleon has just been defeated, and Europe's old leaders are trying to slam the lid back on a continent that had been completely ripped apart by revolution and war. This big meeting was called the Congress of Vienna, and all the major players, Austria, Prussia, Russia, Great Britain, they all had one big goal: stability. Let's put the kings back on their thrones, let's create a delicate balance of power so no one country can run wild again, and this is the crucial part, let's crush these two super dangerous ideas, revolution and something called nationalism. They were basically trying to hit the pause button on history. But you can't just press pause on history, right? Almost right away, these powerful new ideas started bubbling up from below, and they began to crack the very foundations of that old-school conservative world we're trying to build. And there were two main troublemakers. The first was nationalism. This was this fiery, passionate idea that people who share a language and a culture, a people, deserve their own independent country. Now, you can imagine why that was a huge threat to giant multi-ethnic empires like Austria-Hungary. The second force was industrialization. We're talking factories, railways, modern armies. This wasn't just changing economies, it was creating this fierce new competition between states for power and resources. And yeah, the system they built in Vienna started to buckle almost immediately. You had nationalist groups popping up, demanding their own nations. Then in 1830, you actually have successful revolutions in France and Belgium. But the really big one was 1848. They called it the Springtime of Peoples, when uprisings just exploded all over the continent. And even though most of them failed in the short run, the genie of nationalism was officially out of the bottle. There was no going back. So for the next couple of decades, these forces just keep chipping away at that old order. But then an event happened that didn't just chip away at the system, it took a sledgehammer to it. First, Italy managed to unify, which was a huge win for nationalism. But the real earthquake, the event that changed everything, was the creation of a single, unified Germany. This wasn't just a new country on the map, it was a complete reshuffling of the entire power structure of Europe. And this didn't just happen. It was brilliantly and ruthlessly engineered by this one guy, the Prussian Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. He was a political genius, and he used 3 short, sharp wars against Denmark, then Austria, and finally France to get all the smaller German states to rally behind Prussia's leadership. And then, in 1871, get this, in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, the palace of the old French kings, the German Empire was proclaimed. And just like that, a massive, powerful industrial and military giant popped into existence, right in the heart of Europe. The old balance of power was completely and totally dead. Now, what happens when a new, super strong player suddenly appears on the scene? Everybody else gets nervous. And when nations get nervous and scared, they start looking for friends, for allies. With Germany as the new top dog on the continent, the other big powers, especially France, which had just been crushed, but also Russia and Britain, they all had to scramble. The old era of trying to cooperate was over. A new era of intense competition and military alliances had just begun. So by the early 1900s, Europe had basically split into 2 rival teams, 2 armed camps. On one side, you had the Triple Alliance, Germany, its buddy Austria-Hungary, and sort of on the fence Italy. And on the other side, you had the Triple Entente, France, Russia, and Great Britain. And these weren't just friendly handshakes. They were hard and fast military pacts that basically said, an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. All right, we've arrived at the end of our 100-year fuse. The alliances are locked in, the armies are bigger and more modern than ever, the rivalries are white hot. All the pieces for a massive, continent-shattering explosion are right there on the board.
After the turn of the century, things just sped up like crazy. You had a massive arms race, especially a naval race between Britain and Germany. The mad dash for colonies around the world was creating more and more friction. And all those nationalist feelings that had been simmering for a century were boiling over in the Balkans, turning that whole region into what everyone called the powder keg of Europe. And then in June 1914, in Sarajevo, someone lit a match.
You see, when Gavrilo Princip fired that shot, he wasn't just killing an archduke. He was tipping over the first domino in a line that had been carefully set up for 100 years. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. So Russia, Serbia's protector, mobilized its army. So Germany, Austria-Hungary's ally, declared war on Russia and France. Then Britain declared war on Germany. The whole rigid, interlocking system of alliances just dragged everyone, one by one, into the abyss.
And that leaves us with this final, pretty heavy question. Once those enormous forces, nationalism and industrialization, were unleashed on the world in the 19th century, was some kind of huge, catastrophic war basically inevitable? Or could different decisions, different leaders, have steered history down a totally different path? That's something worth thinking about. Thanks so much for joining me.